Hello, everyone. My name is Christine Black, but I like to go by Chrissy. And I just want to thank you guys for joining me as we talk about empowering futures, the vital role of K-12 education in shaping our community. So, a little bit about me and my background. So, my background is in both healthcare and in education. I spent a good chunk of my early years in early childhood education, and then I worked in the healthcare field. My degrees are my associates in sleep diagnostics, my bachelor's in healthcare management. I have a master's in teaching, and I'm currently working on my MBA. So, looking at education, the best way for us to really look at it is kind of dive back into the past about why we have education. And education is not merely a pathway to careers, but it's really the bedrock of our future and how our society grows. When we look back at the ancient Greeks and how they handle education, we can really see how education was kind of formed and how it looked in their societies. If we're looking at Athens and how they started their education, it was mostly privatized, and it was wealthy families really just sending out their sons to a tutor or very small schools where they're learning math and grammar and all the subject matters because they wanted their children to be free thinkers. But what did that look like for their society? Well, their society was, yes, democratic, but it was very controlled by wealthy men. Unfortunately, women in the society did not have a formal education in Athens. But if you look at Sparta, Sparta was actually state controlled education where both males and females went to school. So, yes, it was more of a military esque kind of structure because that's how their society was, but they really focused on making sure that everybody had the same groundwork of education, especially women, because they were the ones being left behind to take care of their society, take care of their community. And so, really, education really was for the rich for many, many centuries. It really wasn't up until the 18th, 19th century where we had the Industrial Revolution. And that's when society said we need to come up with a new way to get new workers into society, into the workplace. And that's actually how we got the schools that we have today. The schools were built to literally model the factory situation and how to make the ideal worker for that plant, even going down to how they even standardize the learning. Basically, the capitalists, the people who own these factories, had a big say so on what was going on into the schools. So, what was being taught, how it was being taught, going down to how children were going to be entering the school system and how they're leaving, even physically. How do they enter into the doorways? How they line up, how we sit them in rows. They wanted them to be so familiar so when they left the classroom, they were immediately working into the factories. You look at how they do the start times. Again, they start at like 7:30, 8 o'clock in the morning and they didn't let out till like 3:30, 4 o'clock in the evenings. They had bell systems. Again, getting kids used to that transition of hearing a bell and going to the next task. Basically, where they were making it to where education was very uniformal and not really free thinking kind of situation. They wanted students to be able to conform. Putting students into age groups, that was a really big important thing because they can all know exactly what time or how they're going to be ready for X amount of jobs. Looking at the performance, that's why we had the grades and the grade levels. Whereas before, it was not like that. It was very much what we call now project-based learning and mastery learning. You keep doing the thing until you get the skill right. So jumping into present day, So we now have our little history on why we have education, right? To see how it builds society. And now we're looking at basically where we are now, up to 2020. Education was basically the same way. We had still lots of school districts with outdated school books and textbooks and materials. But one thing that really worked was, at least for me, because I live here in Nashville, Tennessee, what really worked for me was a lot of projects. We did a lot of projects. We did a lot of group work, and we did a lot of field trips. We had a lot of hands-on learning. But then we had this shift with COVID. And so with COVID, what it kind of brought into was both the goods and bads of that was happening in education. It was showing the cracks that we were all experiencing, but we wasn't talking about it, especially when it comes to technology. Um, we were seeing that our students were not as prepared in the technical world as some of the other students in our neighboring countries. So that was actually a big highlight. And this was actually during a time where I decided to switch career paths and leave healthcare and actually go back into my education, getting my master's in teaching. And during this time, I'm learning how to teach in this new COVID generation, this new COVID environment. And it was a lot of project-based learning. So I always like to talk about this in teacher school. In teacher school, we spend a lot of time learning about theories. What works, what doesn't work, the history about education, yada, yada, yada. And what I really liked about my situation was that I was actually able to be in the classroom while going to school. And that brought me into a lot of perspectives. Like I said, my school really honed out on project-based learning and mastering learning. And what that really means is activities. We learn through activities. And we keep doing activities until we master that skill. We know that is actually the best way to assess a child, to know if they're getting the lesson or not. So we see when we talk about test scores, we know as educators that's not a really good, adequate way to look at a child's understanding of that knowledge. You have some students who are really great test takers, but maybe not really good at that skill set. And you have other students who are really bad at taking tests, but really good at that skill set. And what happened is while I was in the classroom during COVID, after COVID, we did see a shift. We all know about the shift. We know about the test scores going down. We know that there was a lack of basically support. We had a lack of support for our parents. We had a lack of support for our teachers. We had a lack of support for our students. Yes, we were all connected through education, like through the internet, but we didn't have that support to know how or what needed to be taught because we were so used to that society that we have created where we send the kids to school, they go in, we keep everything separate. We just hand the students to the education system and say, here you go, take care of it. Now, what do we do now that the kids can't have someplace to go? That was a huge shift for a lot of people. And so, sorry, I'm looking at some of my points. What we were also seeing was now the textbooks were being replaced. So when we started having kids coming back into the school setting because we realized that there's not that support, we started having kids, at least at my district, a bunch of laptops and stuff like that. And to replace the textbooks, which as a computer science teacher, I love, right? We are now having all the information that we need. It's cheap and it's affordable for the district to hand the laptop and say, let's go ahead and learn. The problem with that is that we now start seeing a disconnect between students and teachers. It became less about the hands-on learning and started seeing more of the distance learning even inside the classroom. So it was very easy for a teacher to go ahead and say, I'm going to go ahead and submit all these works for you, basically worksheets. I'm going to send it out to you, and you guys do it, and then email it to me when you're done. Well, what that started happening is we started, at least for me as a teacher, this is what I saw. I saw students not being able to learn how to write their names. I saw issues where students were not great at spelling, couldn't read because everything was being read to them. And they just started losing those soft skills. When we talk, going back to about that, why those are so important for us to have. So in my MBA class, one of the biggest conversations that we have is that we have so many people who are not getting the jobs that they need or wanting because they don't have the skill sets. In course, quote unquote, education has failed the system. But I really think it really became as society. We have compartmentalized our healthcare, our education, our communities. We have compartmentalized where we're actually a very holistic group. Everything is connected to us. And so when we try to pick out one thing and only say we only do this and not do that, we don't work that way. One thing I love about our community is that we look at things and how everything is connected. And even down to how we even stir our coffee in the morning, everything is connected. And really, that's how we should work with education and children. So that's one of the things. Sorry. So one of the other things that I started seeing, and we're talking about standards. Some of the biggest problems that I did see as a public school teacher was how standards were being changed. So, like I said at the very beginning, standards were actually created so everybody knew the exact same thing, right? We all knew about how to do math. We all knew about certain reading levels. We all knew about things in history, all universal truths. But what started happening while I was there was the political climate and being brought in to PDs and talking about, well, you can talk about this, but you can't talk about that. And standards are being changed. And what that was doing was limiting what we could teach and started actually having people come into our classrooms and into our libraries and start taking out books that I have grown up with, like To Kill a Mockingbird, was taken out. And then even going into the point to where, okay, we gave you this wonderful technology, so you have all this information there, but we're going to censor your information to what you can actually teach the kids. So we're going to quit talking about the civil rights. We're going to quit talking about what happened during the Civil War. We're going to quit talking about this and this and this. And so what that kind of happened with me was I had to take a step back and figure out, could I still stay here in the teaching environment to be a teacher, to teach the kids what they need to know and be a good role model? And that's when I really started deep diving and looking into ways to help my community, the pagan community, because I had a few situations where I had students who I never told anybody. No one knew my belief system. Because that's the reason why I became a public school teacher. I love that we can all come from different backgrounds and we could all talk about our experiences. I never did it though, but we could all talk about our experiences and learn from each other and grow from each other. And it was all okay because it's the public school system, right? What kind of got me onto this path was I was at a local event in Nashville, and I had a student that happened to be there, and I was completely shocked. because I was not expecting any of my students to be there. And I heard her say my name, and we talked, and her parents came over and we talked, um, and I let them know that I was changing schools, so I wasn't going to be at that school the next year. And the parents said, "It's fine. She's not going to say anything that we even seen you here." I was like, "Oh no," that kind of hurt my heart. And then the next day at school, she waited till all the kids were gone. We were outside towards the end of the year. We're having field day. And she comes up to me and she said, "Oh, I'm so happy that I'm not by myself. I didn't know you were like me, Pagan. I didn't know you were like me. I'm so happy." And that also made me realize about the lack of representation in schools and how much kids are so afraid to talk about who they are if there's something different. And I started looking at it through a different lens. And throughout the next couple of years, how much the political climate changed to where it became a little bit more scary to say if you were something other than Christian. And that was kind of a big thing because, again, we're looking at how education is here to create, well-functioning humans and ready for society for us to grow and stuff. But then we have the situation where we can't be ourselves and we're having somebody else with their ideology coming into our schools where we may or may not agree with it and telling us how we should live. Even now, too, if you're looking at some of the standards here in Tennessee, they made it to where you have to talk about success. If and being successful is by having a male and female marriage and having kids. That's how they look at success now, and that's in one of their standards. And to me, when we're looking at trying to build up students and getting them ready for society, there is that blurred line to where whether it's what's being taught and what's being said and who's saying it, does that really fit our community? So we all know the problems. So how do we fix it? I think that's the biggest question that everybody has. How do we fix this problem? We all know that there's issues in the public school, but I don't know what to do. And really what I say is we start small. If you have kids, if you are a family, one of the biggest things that I love that my parents did was we did a lot of projects at home. We were very much involved into, I did a lot of cooking, and that's how I was able to learn math skills, really, in different things of science. We did go on a lot of field trips, and the field trips that we did, because we were a big family, was a lot of the free and public stuff. We went to a lot of parks, and we went to a lot of free events, a lot of cultural events. We went to a lot of just places in general where we're just learning. And what that helped for me as I grew older was I had that connection piece. Because the biggest thing in education, and what they don't really talk to you about it, is that they like to spend lots and lots of money on curriculum. And what the curriculum is basically it's an outline, it's a bunch of worksheets that they're giving you as a teacher to kind of follow that fits the information they want to teach. And the curriculum is actually not quote unquote accredited. You can't accredit curriculum. You don't really have to have a teaching background to do curriculum, to be completely honest. You can write it in any way that you want to. What is accredited is schools. And how they are accredited, and the reason why they're accredited is based on funding. So if you are accredited, that means you're able to, your students are able to get loans, student loans. They're able to get Pell Grants if you're looking at higher education. But mostly is, do you follow the rhetoric of this accreditation, especially if you're looking at state schools? Do you follow the rhetoric that the state school wants you to have? That's how you're accredited. So you look at a bunch of schools around here in the Bible Belt, and there's a lot of private schools. Those schools may or may not be quote unquote accredited because they don't have to be. So that kind of brings us into this. So, yes, we can start small in our house, and that's where you should if you have kids. But then what do you do as a whole community? And again, start small. We look at your local covens, look at your organizations, look at your local pagan groups, and let's look at our members and let's see who has children. And are we providing children and family resources? Yeah, we can have a festival, but that festival is only that one day or that week. What are we doing as a community to provide continuing family and children programming throughout the year? It can just be once a week, once a month, but having that bedrock where families can congregate, where they can meet, where they can get that quote unquote support that they need, that's actually how you start building the education. You start small. You start with having just a family night, where maybe a family game night, and you bring people together through that, and you start creating that network. Then you're able to start having that network and getting that support to where you're starting learning each other's needs. And then from that, that's where you can start looking at, okay, we have enough people, or hey, I decided I want to homeschool and I don't know what to do with that. There's organizations within our community that's actually helping with that. And especially Spiral Family Moon, she's a really, really good one that's working on that. I would definitely recommend groups getting together and start talking about, hey, you know what? You have the skill set. Can you help out? I think that's the biggest misconception, is that with you have to have a teaching background to be able to teach. And really, you don't. Your first teacher was your parent. Or your guardian or whoever. They taught you how to write. They taught you how to use the potty. They taught you how to talk. And I think we need to really look into our members and our leadership in our community and really rely on their knowledge. Look at our elders and rely on that. And bring that support. Once you start having that support, then really the possibilities are endless. You can start a small group that meets once a month. Then that can grow to once a week or multiple times a week. And then you can grow it into, hey, a homeschool co-op. And then you can grow it into a school. A lot of these churches in the Christian community really started out that way. They had a really good foundation in their children and family ministries. And they built that program up to where, oh my goodness, now we need to have a after school program. Okay, so let's start doing that. Oh, now we need a daycare. Then we start doing that. Oh, you know what? We now want a school. And they start building that. For us to do that, we can do that. We just need to start communicating and supporting one another. Having forums like this where we're able to talk about the issues that we are experiencing, this is important. Just because your community your physical community you may be the only pagan there. Your community as a whole is everywhere. And talking about even start doing stuff online. You can still do things online in education, but still have that community and still have that one-on-one experience where you guys are going out in nature and learning and changing the way education is done. So I work with, when I left the classroom, I worked with a nonprofit. And in this nonprofit, we help create curriculum. And curriculum support. And that's something I want to do down here. And I think about two families in particular. And one, their child never went to public school, but when they heard the word school, that child just shut down, had tantrum, did not like it, did not like the word learning. And so we had to change that vocabulary and change that stigma of that, and got the family more involved into doing those activities and creating that environment of, you know what, learning is not a bad thing, school's not a bad thing, it's just how we approach it. And then we got this other family who's always been in public school and now transitioned out into a homeschool environment. And there was some lapse in education just because of how the school was structured and COVID and this and that and the other. But they start out trying to do school very much like how they were used to. All right, let's get up. We're going to do, only 8 hours of work all at one time. And when we were actually able to sit down and talk to them about, really, if you're doing how school is actually structured, you have 1,000 hours that is mandated by your state. And you break that down to 180 days, which is the normal school year. That's about 4.5 hours of schoolwork, because that's really as much as anybody can learn and retain in one day. Again, the reason why we have 8 hours is because, that's how factories work, right? And when you talk about year-round schooling, well, you break that down to 365, and that's around 2.5, almost 3 hours, 2.5 hours of learning every day. And when we broke it down and we talk about, well, what is learning? Well, here is a guide, but it's really you going out there and experiencing the world and having these conversations. So they did a unit about ants and how they were able to break that off into, what was amazing was it started out learning about ants and their life cycle and colonies, and then what they brought into, and the kids were really, really excited, is learning about the colonization of early settlements and learning about how society, and learning about they went to a deep dive. Okay, so if we're going to take a community, we're going to learn from it and grow from it. What was some of the things of power? So we need to talk about our government and the government and power. And they just branched off into a whole another area and really got into their own active and discovery and learning. And it really changed the way their whole family took education. And seeing this, and they're also pagans as well, and seeing how it was also intertwining with their traditions and how they work in their daily life with their deities and stuff like that. It just creates this holistic approach into what learning should be. Wasn't compartmentalized, it's everything that they were doing. And that's really kind of what we just need to go back to, is we do so well as adults of trying to find that mentor, and we learn through activities. We keep doing it and keep doing the rituals. We keep doing the rituals until it becomes second nature, until we have mastered it, until we can go ahead and teach it to somebody else. And that's really what we're looking with our children. We need to treat education the exact same way. And create it to where they're actively involved in everything that we're doing. They're actively involved in our space. If we want them to succeed, if we want our community to keep thriving, if we want, again, living in the Bible Belt, one of the biggest things I worry is every time I have to call a repair guy into my house to make sure that I can get the repair done, but also at a reasonable price, and not have to hide my stuff. You have so many other people of faith saying, hey, I'm a good blah, 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 or down here, hey, I'm a good Christian guy, you can trust me. But what that tells me is like, okay, I can't invite you in. Whereas we in our community, we need to have people who we feel safe. We need electricians, we need plumbers, we need doctors, we need lawyers, we need people in our community that will protect us, especially with everything that's going on right now. Even some of the new laws that are passing in Tennessee, to where if you're looking at healthcare wise, they can deny you on religious basis alone for whatever your medical needs. So for us, for our protection, we had to build a bedrock, a strong bedrock in education. We had to bring that support. Whether or not you have children or not, that's also the biggest thing I hear. Well, I would totally love to support you, but I don't have any kids, so I don't know how to help. Okay, you don't have kids, but you still live in our society, and you're still going to need a doctor. You're still going to need a lawyer. You're going to still need an electrician. You're going to still need these things. So you should probably support, volunteer with different organizations within your community. Um, volunteer, give out financially help out. And going into looking at it like, okay, you don't have anybody physically in your community, you don't have any other pagan organizations. When I was talking about those two families lived in two opposite ends of the United States. But they were able to bring that support online. You know, if we had to start small of building a community online and then build it into a physical space, that's important for us to come together on here on the internet and know that we're not alone. There's other people like us. That's important. And showing that, we are united in that. So the biggest things I would just suggest is, again, start small. Start having let's say once a month, a family game night, to start out with that, and then go on to other interests and building up that way, having those safe places where families can connect and support one another. And then we are able to start building more homeschool co-ops, both online and in person, and then be able to start building schools, because that's going to be our biggest way for us to keep our community thriving and safe, not just our pagan community, but our community at whole. So, but does anybody have any questions or any information? I know that was a lot of information. So sorry about that. But yeah, if you have any kind of questions or trying to figure out how to start one, if you're lost, is like, oh my goodness, that was a really good idea, but I don't know where to go. Reach out to other people who have done it, or even reach out to me. Again, being part of a community is really building that support for one another. And, as a community, we're really brilliant. How much we deep dive and how much we learn and study, just for our own spiritual practice. But then let's take that into the next step. How can we bring that same mentality in our spiritual practice into our practice for every day for basically our children in our community? So you don't have to be an expert, but you are going to have to be willing to learn. And I think that's where we all need to be. It's just learning and building that community together and supporting one another, especially those who are already creating those communities, support them as well. So thank you so very much. I hope you guys have a wonderful day. And if you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat or reach out to me on Pagan Congress. So y'all have a good day.